Shame on us. This is a challenging reading. Sometimes when we hear our reading from the Bible, they're like that. And I think a lot of parishes around the world, churches of all stripes actually, would be seeing this as a fairly straightforward gospel to preach. It's about investing in the church. And it's basically saying to all of you who have, you're supposed to give more than others. And to the ones who don't, you've got to give something. Or, it's not going to go well for you. And that, I guess that would preach. That's one way of looking at it. And it's not to say, though, that the reading isn't what the reading is. The reading is what it is. And so, of course, part of this is the context of the times, the language that was used, the framing of the economic systems at that time that make this challenging to hear. In Jesus' time, there were slaves. The word slaves really comes from the Greek, doulos. It really means servants as well. So like a doula at birth is a servant. It comes from that word. They weren't chattel slaves the way that we had chattel slavery in our country, but they were bound to their master. They were yoked to their masters. And Jesus tells a story about this master. This master had many talents. Talent was a unit of money, and it was the largest unit. It would be like, a $500 bill, a lot of money in those times. So he had a lot of talents, apparently 8 of them, and that was like $1 million. And so you might also think of it as something like a huge orchard. Imagine he had a huge orchard with many, many trees that produced a lot of fruit. And growing fruit was his business. He was in the business of growing and selling fruit. And he's planning to go away, and someone had to manage the orchard to make sure the trees were watered and pruned, that some of the dying ones were removed and new ones were planted, that the fruit was gathered, such that he was hoping that he would continue to increase his harvest as his business was a growing business, literally and figuratively. He was going to be gone for a long time. So he asked his 3 servants to manage his business, his orchards. And he knew that some of his servants were more experienced than others. He could expect more of some than others. He gave one servant more than half of the job to manage. He gave another a smaller portion, and to a third he gave even less. And he's gone a long, long time, and when he returns, he hopes he would find that his orchards were even more productive than when he left. So he asks each of his servants, "How did you do?" And the first one says, "Well, of the portion of the orchards you gave me, we doubled our output because, I grafted the trees and I used special fertilizer, and, so we have a lot more peaches than we used to have." The second one said, "Well, okay, you gave me the apples. It was, I pruned, I watered, I did all the things, and we definitely increased our yields." The third one says, "I know you asked me to plant more trees and to prune some of your trees, but I was afraid that if I pruned them, I would cut the branches off and I would get it wrong and the trees would be damaged. And I wasn't sure I knew how to plant new trees and make them grow." This is me talking. I'm a hospice worker for plants. So I didn't prune or plant at all while you were gone. I just watered the ones that were there and picked the fruit. And, we got the usual amount of fruit, so hope that's okay. And the master says, "Not okay," in no uncertain terms, "not okay." The third servant you had everything you needed to increase the orchard. You could have asked for help. You could have come up with more ideas. Basically, you're fired. And this is where it feels kind of harsh. The master calls the third servant wicked and lazy. And he tells him, you will suffer for this. So Jesus tells this story this way, in a way that would have been understood in his day. But in us, does it sound like Jesus? Does it sound like the one who said, "The meek will inherit the earth"? It sounds like he's kind of stepping on that third slave. And so this master is asking a lot, and not very not very, he's not very relaxed about it. So this is why we scratch our heads a little about this passage, because we start this story saying the kingdom of heaven is as if a master. So it's hard to avoid the truth that we're talking about Jesus, that Jesus is saying, this is God's dream, and I am your master. So, first of all, what does Jesus mean by the kingdom of heaven? He means God's dream for all of us, a world where people are kind and giving and cared for each other, where everyone has enough, where there's a lot of work to be done, but the work is shared equitably amongst people, where people who are hungry have food, where people who are sick have care, where the people who are miserable are lifted up. This is the kingdom of heaven, and we are all called to bring that to earth, to be the servants of the master, so that God's dream may come true. So God's business is healing and love, and it is hard work, but it is work we are being asked to do as Christ's disciples. So Jesus is saying, I'm giving you my business to run. In fact, Jesus has said this. He has given us his business to run. We are the tenders of the orchard. And Jesus trusts us, but needs us to do his work in the world. So he has started the movement, and we are, so to speak, to make it viral. Instead of fruit, we are bearers of truth and justice and love and kindness. And it's a big job. But you see, the premise here is that everything we have comes from the master. So we are sort of makers of things from what we have been given. So we can start in gratitude for God's giving us life, giving us skill, giving us reason. And these gifts are given over to us so that we can bear fruit. And we all have something to give, and we all have choice. I love how our hymn says, what we give comes from a heart both frightened and free. We can be afraid that we don't have enough, or we're not enough, or our fruit looks a little paltry, or we don't know how to prune or tend very well. But we are also free to give from what we have, according to our skill, according to our means. And I think sometimes the master is just asking us to just do it, to not dither, to not overthink it, to not be afraid, to not be a perfectionist. These are the things that keep us from being available to this mission of God. And what strikes me about the master in the gospel is that he does not give clear instructions to the servants about what to do. He does not say, put your money in futures, or you need to write a symphony, or you need to work on this particular social concern, or you need to become a doctor, or you need to give to this charity. That's what I'm asking you to do. So it turns out interesting that even though we're talking about slaves, about servants, this is really about freedom. We are not asked to give out of servitude. We are asked to give freely from our gifts. And we are not coerced to give. We are yoked to God, but God has given us freedom to determine how we may help bring God's dream for the world to come into reality. And so what this requires, to some extent, is our getting out of our own way. And to understand fundamentally that we are beloved exactly as we are, as meager, modest as our gifts may be. It is not really the measure of their size. It is the measure of our faith. It is the measure of our trust. It is the measure of our commitment that God is interested in. And that's what was failing in the third servant. The servant got in his own way. And so Jesus says, I love you, but you're not going to be part of the dream because you're not participating. You're not committed. So in some ways, aren't we all like that third servant? Sometimes we're like the second servant. Sometimes we're like the first servant. Sometimes we're like the third servant. I I was going to go to potluck in the park, but, I don't like going downtown, so I didn't go. Or I was going to write a check for this, but, I need to get my air conditioning fixed. All of those things are part of the mix. We're never 100%, but we are asked to keep our commitment, and because we are being asked to be accountable. And the measure of our success is not in our wealth. It is in our faith, and it is in our trust, and it is in the joy that we enter into when we give freely. So what would it be like to give from total freedom, as if we absolutely trusted God's mission, as if we were truly thankful and enjoy the beauty of looking at God's world through God's eyes? What would it be like to give as if we trusted that God was always with us, that we really are God's co-creators in this world? What would it be like if we said yes to entering into the joy of God's realm? What would it be like if we trusted in our belovedness, such that we would not shrink from giving back, from serving, from helping, from tossing even that smallest pebble into the pond, believing that even a tiny ripple can bring forth a song? What would it be like? It would be like the kingdom of heaven.